side of you.
This is a little tight.
This is very tight. It's my good friend. My good friend, Ben Tucker.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. In a moment, you'll hear from Mayor de Blasio, then you're going to hear from Chief of Crime Control's Strategies, Lori Pollack, and Chief Monahan will go over our homicide strategy, and then Kings County DA Eric Gonzalez is going to speak also. First and foremost, I want to thank you for the good work that was done in telling the story in the media of who Detective Brian Simonson was and is, and what his legacy will continue to mean, not only to those of us in the NYPD, but to his family and his friends, and to all the people of the 102 Precinct in Queens, and quite frankly, to all the people in New York City. So I really, truly thank you for that. Citywide, fighting crime and keeping people safe is an ongoing effort. Conditions are ever-changing, and each neighborhood has different dynamics that have to be individually addressed. Our approach to combating spikes in murders, shootings, and other crimes must constantly be adjusted as circumstances dictate. We are always in the process of deploying the right type and amount of resources at the appropriate time and places, and the work our members on the ground do to continually focus very precisely on the real drivers of crime, the small percentage of people responsible for a majority of the violence. As I said, we do have an increase in homicides, and Chief Monahan will speak about our plan. And because of these efforts, New York City has collectively seen massive overall reductions over the years. But as you know, we've identified 9 commands at the end of last year that had violent crime rates more than twice as high as the rest of the city. And we called for a series of community-based meetings in each of these neighborhoods to find out what the NYPD can do in close partnership with our fellow city agencies, our elected officials, and our neighborhood leaders to make the streets of those communities just as safe as all of our streets. We've had 3 meetings already. There are discussions with contributions by all involved. We have some fresh ideas and insights, and what I'll call a holistic approach to reducing violence in those 9 commands. Because it can't just be the NYPD. It's going to take every resident and every worker and every agency and every community-based group if it's going to work properly. We all have to listen, and we all have to take action together. That's how we build trust and strengthen relationships. And we'll know these efforts are ultimately successful when participation from all sectors of government and communities is commonplace, when crime and disorder continue to fall, and when quality of life on every block and every neighborhood is improved, and most importantly, sustained. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner, I want to thank you and the men and women of the NYPD. Once again, we saw in the month of February the impact of precision policing and neighborhood policing, the difference it makes, and the overall drop in crime that was achieved, record lows being set once again. That's the good news. The bad news is we see some areas of real concern, particularly when it comes to homicide. We take that very, very seriously. You're going to hear today an aggressive plan to address some of the uptick we've seen. We look at this, every one of us looks at each individual homicide as a human life. It is our obligation when we see any kind of negative activity to do something about it. And I think the plan that's been put together will be announced today is a very aggressive approach. I want to thank all the leadership at NYPD who are here. Special thanks to First Deputy Commissioner Ben Tucker. You're going to hear from Chief Terry Monahan in a moment as well. Thanks to them and their teams for the work they have done on the plan that will be discussed today. Also want to thank the Director of Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, Liz Glazer, who's been directly involved in this effort, and thank her for her leadership as well. Now, when it comes to the overall picture, this is where the good news is. Overall crime, year to date, compared to last year, down almost 11%. Once again, the NYPD has beat its own records for driving down overall crime, and that's very good news for the people of this city. You'll hear from Chief Pollack on the details, and again from Chief Monahan on some of the specific actions that we're going to take to address some of the areas that we are not satisfied with. What we do know is that the use of precision policing allows us to make quick adjustments and really focus on the areas that need additional help. So in the plan you're going to hear about in a moment, a couple of things will stand out. First of all, making sure that there's more officers in some of the places that need them the most. So there'll be strategic redeployments to some of the precincts that are having some challenges. We want to make sure there's additional strength there, and you'll see that, including more support from the Strategic Response Group. Second, you're going to hear about our close collaboration with the Brooklyn District Attorney, who will speak in a moment, and what he is doing, working with us to step up gun prosecutions. This is crucial. This is one of the building blocks of reducing violence in Brooklyn. And third, the NYPD has had success with the anti-gang violence initiative known as Ceasefire. That's going to be expanded. We want to help ensure that people who have been involved in gangs are given the maximum opportunity to get out of that life and no longer participate in violence. And the expansion of the Ceasefire initiative can make a big impact. So, as we have seen for many years, the NYPD keeps innovating even when there are challenges. The answer here is to come up with new strategies and new approaches, or deepen the things that we know work and apply them to the areas of greatest concern. This is why we're the safest big city in America. This is why we will continue to be the safest big city in America, because of the ability of the NYPD to make those kind of rapid adjustments and have a huge impact on the people that they serve. A couple quick words in Spanish. Gracias al valor y la dedicación del NYPD, el crimen sigue cayendo a niveles históricamente bajos. Sin embargo, este mes pasado la policía notó un aumento en los homicidios y ha creado un plan de inmediato para detenerlo. Nuestros oficiales trabajan todo el tiempo porque el crimen nunca descansa. Vamos a seguir trabajando para que la ciudad más grande del país sea aún más segura. With that, I want to turn to Chief Pollack, who will analyze the crime data for this month and year-to-date.
Good morning. Overall, crime is again at an all-time low. January and February, with an overall crime reduction of over 8%, have us on pace for the lowest quarter in the CompStat era. This means that this February, for the first time, we recorded under 900 robberies, a record low for any month, under 800 burglaries, also a record low for any month, and car theft is at a new low of 326 for any month. Shootings, however, were up in February but remained down for the year-to-date. Murder has increased in both February and year-to-date, and as you can see in today's press release, rape reporting trends continue, but with smaller increases over last year. You will be hearing from Chief Monahan shortly regarding initiatives and measures taken to address areas and precincts where we have seen an increase in violence. Murders in February were up 24 versus 16. Brooklyn's increase drove the February murder violence, accounting for half of the city's murders, recording 12 versus 5 during the same period last year. Murder year-to-date, end of February, we were up 52 versus 38. Overall, gang-related murders accounted for 30% of the citywide incidents. Domestic murders accounted for 23% of our murder incidents, and drugs or narcotics-related accounted for 10%. Brooklyn North was 15 versus 5. The motives for these murders are primarily drugs, gang, and other disputes where the parties are known to each other. Higher than the city average of half, 70% of these Brooklyn North murders were the result of being shot, and 7 of the 15 murders occurred in housing. Brooklyn South was 9 versus 4, including 3 males killed in a hammer attack in the 6-1 precinct. Queens North, 4 versus 1. Manhattan North, 4 versus 1. Manhattan South, 2 versus 1. And Staten Island, 1 versus 0, with Queens South and the Bronx both having decreases in murder. 12 of our murder victims were the result of domestic violence. All of these domestic murders occurred behind closed doors. The victims and perpetrators varied between having no domestic history with each other to no recent police contact. We have closed all of these cases to arrest or suicide of the perpetrator. There have been no domestic shootings this year. Last year we had domestic shootings with 27 domestic shootings with 19 associated deaths. We have been vigilant in removing guns from households where there are reports of domestic violence. We removed 66 guns in 2018, February, we removed 8 guns, bringing our total of guns removed from homes with reports of domestic violence to 14 so far in 2019. Shootings during February increased 42 versus 36. Manhattan North saw the biggest increase in shootings this month, 9 versus 4, with drugs, gangs, and disputes amongst people known to each other as the drivers of the violence. Queens North increased 5 versus 2, Brooklyn North increased 7 versus 4, and Queens South increased 5 versus 1. Year-to-date shootings, however, we are down to 93 versus 95. 25% of the 93 shootings were fatal, and 37% are gang-related year-to-date. Brooklyn North increased 21 versus 12, with the 7-5 and 7-9 precincts driving their shooting number with five each year-to-date. Manhattan North had 16 versus 9 shootings, an increase of 78%, and their shootings are almost solely driven by gangs and drugs. The areas driving the violence in Manhattan North are the 3-4 precinct, where year-to-date there have been 5 versus 1 shooting, 2 of which occurred in February, followed by the 2-3 and the 3-2 precincts with 4 narcotics or gang-related shootings each. Queens North increased 8 versus 4, with the 109 precinct recording 4 shootings this year, and Staten Island is even with 2 shootings. Brooklyn South decreased 11 versus 14, and Queens South decreased 10 versus 14, with the 113 recording 3 of these shootings. Bronx saw a significant 34% decrease in shootings year-to-date, down 25 down from 38. The Bronx just went 7 days from February 25th to March 3rd without a shooting incident. This 4-3 precinct is driving the shootings in that borough with 5 year-to-date. Rape. February saw an increase, as has been the trend. It was 133 versus 122. However, the increase is 9% this month, as opposed to the above 30% increase we saw last February. Another distinction is a leveling off of rapes from prior years. As you can see in your printed brief, the increase in rapes is primarily from February 2019 and mostly domestic, which we believe has been traditionally underreported. We have an arrest rate of approximately 50% this February for domestic rapes and 40% year-to-date. Special Victims CompStat was held in early February for the first time, allowing a citywide sharing of strategies. We will be holding those meetings regularly. We shared best practices and initiatives, and the lively conversations we had during those meetings were very fruitful. Many of our clusters of violence are driven by gang activity and gun violence. We have seen similar increases in violence during last year, and our murder number remained under 300 through the end of 2018 because of the constant attention to detail with precision policing and the great work of our detectives in solving cases. The last 3 months of 2018 were all-time low record numbers for murder and shootings. An increase in murders, shootings, and rapes is always concerning. One murder, one shooting, one rape is too many, but it is too early to say this increase is indicative of a lasting trend. Fluctuations are constantly monitored and addressed, as Chief Monahan will explain.
You finished?
Yep, that was to you.
That's your cue. That's your cue. I got it. I'm quick like that. All right, good afternoon, everyone. As you just heard from Chief Pollack, overall crime has continued to drop in New York, and we've had 2 fewer shootings this year than we had last year. And in spite of these historic successes, we have some serious concerns over the increase in murders. We've had 52 murders so far this year, an increase of 14 compared with the same period in 2018. 7 of the 52 are reclassifications that occurred prior to 2019. The remaining 45 murders have occurred in 2019. 23, or 51% of them, were by the use of a firearm. We are working quickly and strategically to stem this violence. Today, we are announcing a 5-point violence reduction plan that will address this uptick from several different angles. First, precision deployment. We took a close look at the 45 murders that have occurred so far this year, as well as the 93 citywide non-fatal shooting incidents we have. Through this analysis, we identified 4 precincts that are currently experiencing pockets of violence. They are the 3-4, the 4-3, the 7-9, and the 113 precincts. Beginning immediately, we will be sending at least 8 additional officers from other precincts around those boroughs to each of these commands. They will be deployed by the precinct executive officer at highly visible locations and at critical times when and where this violence has occurred. The Strategic Response Group will be bolstering these additional officers by pre-deploying to designated hotspots within these commands. The Warrant Squad, working with our partners at parole and probation, our warrant investigators will be focusing on these locations in order to identify and apprehend top offenders who are drivers of violence that have open warrants. Through our in-depth CompStat analysis, Command's driving violence will be evaluated each week and adjustments will be made to these deployments accordingly. If we look at the 4 commands that we're targeting right now, they're up 7-3 in homicides and 18-9 in shootings year to date. The second point is increased partnership with the Brooklyn DAs to help with gun prosecutions. When we look at Brooklyn as a whole so far this year, this is where our problems lie. We're up in homicides 24 versus 9. We're up in shootings 32 versus 26. For this reason, myself, along with other members of the NYPD leadership team, will be meeting with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice and the Kings County District Attorney Eric Gonzalez to discuss gun prosecutions in Brooklyn. In fact, as soon as this press conference is over, we're going to be sitting down having this meeting. Together, we are working to ensure gun arrests are fully prosecuted because anyone who is carrying a gun, an illegal gun, on the streets is a moment away from a shooting, and any shooting could be a millimeter away from turning into a homicide. Third, we're going to be expanding our ceasefire efforts. We've seen tangible successes with our comprehensive intervention program that offers an alternative to the gang lifestyle. Based on these reductions in violence, we will expand the ceasefire program to 3 commands in Brooklyn, the 6-0, the 7-0, and Police Service Area 1, and 2 additional commands in the Bronx, the 4-3 and the 4-8 precinct. Fourth, we're going to be starting a re-entry stat in collaboration with the Manhattan DA's office, Chauncey Parker. We will be convening meetings beginning in April to take a close look at resources being offered to individuals upon leaving prison and to prioritize those most likely to reoffend. We will marshal all the resources of parole, probation, the DA's office, HIDA, and MOCJ, so we can give a simple message to those returning from prison. You don't have to become a victim or a criminal again. There is another way to go. We will talk about all the recent releases who will be coming out. Anyone who's out, we will discuss the rearrest. And then most importantly, we'll be discussing what services we can be offered to these individuals so that they do not reoffend. Fifth and final is the domestic violence gun investigations. We have completed a thorough review of domestic violence incidents involving guns in 2018. As Chief Pollack said, 27 incidences revolving in 19 murders by guns. As a result, we launched a pilot program going back around 4 months ago with the Intelligence Bureau and our Field Intelligence Office in conjunction with command-level domestic violence officers, in which we opened an intensive investigation on each domestic violence incident that involves a gun in any capacity. This includes a mention of someone known to have possession of or any access to a firearm. As Chief Pollack mentioned earlier, because of their efforts, we have successfully removed 66 guns from individuals involved in domestic violence incidents. As we move through the first quarter of 2019, we will continue this focused approach to domestic incidents involving firearms. Again, as Chief Pollack said, it's worth noting we have not had a domestic violence homicide involving a gun so far this year. New York City has experienced unprecedented drops in crime and violence over the last few years. And while the men and women in blue have done phenomenal work through neighborhood policing and our precision investigations, we are by no means complacent. This 5-point plan is doubling down on our commitment to the safety of every single New Yorker. The residents of every borough, in every neighborhood, on every block have the right to be safe and to feel safe, while at the same time sharing trust and respect with our local cops. We hold ourselves to this standard. The NYPD has a 2.5-decade track record of reducing crime. We have no intention of stopping that in 2019. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. Last speaker, very important to our efforts to ensure that this is a safe city. Obviously, a lot of challenges we're experiencing are in Brooklyn, but we have a tremendous partner in Brooklyn, and the NYPD leads the way, but there's no way that this work can be done effectively without a real partner in the district attorney. I want to thank District Attorney Eric Gonzalez and his whole team for their persistence and their partnership with us. And again, this additional focus on gun prosecutions is going to make a huge, huge impact. District Attorney Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to thank the police commissioner and all of the rest of the New York City Police Department who's invited me today to serve as a partner with them in reducing gun violence in our communities. It's important that I be here to show our community that we're working together in full cooperation with our police department, that we're collaborative in our approach and how we're going to continue to drive down violence in our communities. And I've celebrated with many people in Brooklyn the historic public safety gains that we've achieved in the last few years. Today, as we take a look at some disturbing numbers of some increases, it's important that we stand together and figure out collaborative ways of reducing this violence. My office works very closely with the New York City Police Department, particularly on gun cases. It may surprise you to learn that we speak about each gun case and every gun case arrest. We talk about who the offenders are, why they have the guns, where they come from. It's part of my office's crime strategies approach to make sure that we're putting emphasis on the drivers of violent crime. That approach has led to reductions in the number of shootings over the last few years. And as we've talking about crime increasing, we also see that other categories of major crime have actually been reduced in the city and in Brooklyn. And I'm optimistic that as we put together the plan that Chief Monahan has described, we are going to get the numbers back in alignment in Brooklyn in ways that we believe will further decrease violence in our community. You know, in terms of gun violence, 11 of the homicides that took place were by gun, but we've had some unusual circumstances in Brooklyn this year in terms of some domestic violence and elder abuse homicides, as well as the unfortunate hate crime, three-person murder in Sheepshead Bay. So we're going to take a close look on how we continue to fight violent crime, and we're going to partner with the police department on programs like Ceasefire. Ceasefire is an important enforcement tool because we go after the drivers of crime as they're criminally engaged in activity. But as the mayor was saying, we also provide services to folks before they get engaged in crime. And so we're going to work very closely with our clergy and our community leaders and our violence interrupters to make sure that young people who have not already started to get involved in crime but are at risk of doing so are provided services so they don't do that. So there's a multi-pronged approach here, but what I want the people of the city of New York and Brooklyn to know is that the DA's office is in complete alignment with the police department and how we are going to fight violence in our community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
It's going to open it up to some questions about the crime statistics. Dave.
I got that you're concerned about these 4 precincts. You're going to flood them with more officers, that gang-related activity may be the reason. But specifically, what's the reason? Why are we seeing this on the street comparing, let's say, December of last year when we had all-time record low to today? Something changed out there. What was it?
And Dave, we're not really seeing it on the street. We have an increase in homicides inside as opposed to outside. I think you have that number, Lori?
Yes. The indoor, they're at 60% of the murders, and that is up. Go ahead.
I just mean, what's changing out there from, let's say, December when we had record lows to now? What's the reason?
Yeah, we have shootings down. We do have some reclasses. We have 7 this year as opposed to 4 last year. We had the attack out in Brooklyn South with the 3 murders with the hammer. So we're talking about very low numbers. These are the lowest homicide numbers we've had since the 1950s. So they're going to be periodic fluctuations. So that's why I asked Terry Monahan and Lori to come up with a strategy, a murder strategy, to make sure we do our best to protect the people of the city.
Yeah, and Dave, I think the thing that is, your question makes a lot of sense, but what the trend shows us is what's so striking. The overall crime numbers down 11%. So we have to see that in perspective, too. I think if we saw something where a number of different categories were all going in the same negative direction, we would be very, very deeply concerned. We obviously take this matter very, very seriously, but it's against a backdrop where overall crime is going down still.
So there's not one specific reason. Is this just a fluke?
Right, no, it's multiple MOs, it's multiple boroughs throughout the city. I think Lori and Terry explained that. It's Brooklyn North, it's the 3-4, it's the 4-3 up in the Bronx. You know, these are very specific locations, so that's why the strategy that we're employing will be effective. Tony?
Chief Pollack, I guess. In terms of the domestic homicide, which is about, I think, 23% of the total homicides you have now, none seem to be with guns or weapons, a gun being used in the homicide, if that's correct, this year. What's the MO on that? Is it strangulation? Is it stabbing? Is it something else? And really, the second part of this is, what can you do if the stuff is hanging behind closed doors? What kind of precursor could you look for to maybe intervene something?
Let me just, before you answer that, Lori, just in general, Tony, this is, I mean, if you take a look at what has been occurring in New York City since the 1990s, when we had a record high homicides of 2,245. I mean, this is, we can't sit here and say, well, you know, they're happening inside, they're happening behind closed doors. There's nothing we can do. The NYPD has never taken that approach, and we never will. So we're looking at domestic violence homicides. We're looking at inside homicides. We're looking at gangs and crews. We're doing very good things now, but I'm sure there's things that we could do better.
Most of the manners of death were 3 were force, and the rest were the other 9 were from knives, were cuts. So, you know, things that are around the house, nothing specific, nothing that that's contraband, just knives that you find around the house or other household items used to kill people. No, there was no strangulation.
Rocco?
Commissioner, how do you go about strengthening a gun prosecution, and how often does that involve making it going to the fence with it as their sentencing guidelines are required?
I'll let Terry and Eric speak about that a little bit, but it's got to be hard work on both sides. It's got to be on the prosecution side, and it certainly has to be on the arrest side.
From our side, we have to make sure that we're presenting the best possible case to the DA's office. So we're doing everything we can. We're making sure guns get down to the lab in time. We're making sure we're getting video out there. We're making sure we're getting interrogations of the people that we arrest. As far as it goes to federal prosecutions, if it qualifies for trigger lock, that means they have a past felony conviction or a past domestic violence conviction. Then we could take it to the feds where the sentencing guidelines are a little bit stronger. And then we sit down with Eric, and I know we disagree every once in a while on what should be prosecuted, what shouldn't, but we sit down, we try and work this out, and that's part of what we're going to be doing later on today.
The various factors that you just mentioned, did you notice a gap or an area where you could improve, or is it just...
Oh, always. On a daily basis, we're looking at this. And we just seen what's going on right now with the violence. We just have to get better on both sides here.
Let's go to the district attorney.
I think Chief Monahan touched on the main issues, which is each one of these cases, they have to be strengthened to every measure possible in terms of providing the evidence that a jury would need to convict someone beyond a reasonable doubt. We're working very closely, and like I said, we speak about every single gun arrest to make sure that all the evidence is achieved, including the forensics from OCME to make sure we have testing and DNA recovered on these guns. My office is also in the process of doing some training on some of the issues that are common in these cases, from suppression hearings to what it takes to win these cases at trial. So we're working on it. We also have a very close relationship with the Eastern District of New York, where we're beginning to start having these conversations of what cases are better handled by them versus us. Like, we have issues when it comes to confidential informants in state practice, where they can probably do a much better job in those kind of cases.
Follow quickly, have the top source states changed at all? The gun's still coming essentially from the same southern states as well as Ohio?
Yeah, we're still seeing the same thing. Again, we're very concerned about that person walking the streets of Brooklyn or the Bronx carrying that gun, because that's the one that's going to do the shooting. So those are the prosecutions we're talking about right now.
In the back?
Commissioner, what's the time frame for the 5-point plan? How long will it take? Are you rolling it out all at once or gradually?
The timeframe on the 5-point plan.
Today. Today on most of it. The reentry stat will start in April, but everything else is as of today.
Given that domestic violence deaths are helping to drive the increase in murders, are you doing anything differently in the way that you're handling domestic violence calls? I know as part of the 5-point plan you have domestic violence gun investigations, but gun deaths were not part of the domestic violence deaths so far this year, so I'm wondering if you're changing your strategy in any way to address domestic violence.
Did you give out the number for domestic violence homicides year to date?
Yes, we had 12 domestic violence homicides. Like I said, the varying degrees of history would not trigger an intervention on our part. A lot of these people did not have history with each other. They had history with other people, and that history was old. So without maybe a neighbor or somebody calling us and telling us that there's an issue, we would not have had an opportunity to intervene in these situations.
And that's part of what we're looking for, is more outreach. We're looking for, if anyone, the old see something, say something. A victim of domestic violence may not be reporting, but a neighbor hearing something, call, so we can start getting an intervention. I think only 3 of the 12 homicides had any sort of previous history. So most of them, we'd never had any interactions before. And speaking with the guns, last year, 19 were killed by guns. So that's why we're keeping that focus. It worked. It's working so far this year, and we're going to continue that.
Yep.
Chief Pollock. So you were discussing the increase in complaints over the last year, as well as you attributed to domestics, as well as I was wondering if you consider the miscellaneous sex crimes also went up about 25%. Do you attribute that to also increased reporting? And you also said that
We do, and we are looking at that as well. We do attribute that to the increased reporting.
increased 17% in grade 1, which is the most serious rapes.
I'm not following your question.
You also say it's an increase in reporting the most serious of rapes. Grade 1 was also 17%. Do you consider that it's also for an increase in reporting?
Yes, because the domestics are forcible, so that's a rape 1. So I can give you that after. You do have the time breakout, but we can give you the category breakout as well.
Tony.
For D.A. Gonzalez, historically, as we've heard over the years, gun prosecutions in Brooklyn have sometimes, there's been a rate of certain dismissal rates, sometimes as high as 30% when these cases get to court. For various reasons, it could be suppression, it could be other issues. And are you satisfied with what your dismissal rate is now in those cases? And what happens once you get to conviction? Are you seeing the kinds of sentences you want to get?
That's a good question. So we're in the process of auditing our gun prosecutions. We have a gun part in Brooklyn that's unique to Brooklyn that is supposed to help enhance the speed by which these cases are handled. I'm personally dissatisfied that that is happening in the way that we hoped it to happen when the mayor and others helped us create that part, because part of enforcement and having the impact that it needs to have in the community is we believe that swift, certain punishment is very important. We're not doing such a great job in being swift, and so that's part of the concerns that we're going to have. In terms of enhancing the penalty, we're not trying a number of these cases, and the number of cases that we do try, we're not winning a number of these cases, so we're working very closely to make sure that we can do a better job. That's a self-reflection, inter-reflection on how well we're handling those cases, and that's why we sit down with the police department to go through these cases. So we need to do a better job. There's no question that we need to do better in Brooklyn in terms of these cases, but there are things that are important in gun prosecutions beyond the ultimate sentence that we need to work on, as well as making sure that these cases come in and that people are actually held accountable. We're not seeing bail on these cases, so people are being arrested by police officers who have to make these arrests. These are dangerous arrests to to effectuate because there are people with loaded guns. There's not bail being set on these cases, and these cases don't get tried for over a year, which means that the offender is out on the street, which means that people know that someone who gets caught for gun, how seriously are we taking this if there's no consequence. So we have to do a lot more, and we're going to sit down and try to figure this out together with the police department and the mayor's office. But we are looking at it, and we've been auditing our numbers. And so the long answer to your very easy question is I'm not satisfied, but I'm working on it.
Can I just add, let me jump in here, that the point the DA made, we need criminal justice reform in Albany, and certainly we need measures that will speed up the trial process. As you said, we have a lack of speedy justice right now. Excuse me. But we also need reform that would give judges the ability to consider the dangerousness of an individual in terms of making their decisions on whether they should be held. Because that exact scenario you point to is one of the problems that's plaguing us, and that can only be changed via legislation in Albany. That's something that I highlighted in my testimony back in February. We're going to be working very hard to achieve in this legislative session.
Just to follow up on what the mayor just said, I don't think, DA, you were able to get to my final part of the question. The sentences that you are seeing, are you satisfied with what you get from the judiciary in terms of gun convictions?
Well, when we try these cases and we win them, they have mandatory minimums. Those are imposed. I think what the bigger question is not what our judiciary is doing, is how we're plea bargaining these cases. Is what we're doing making sense in the terms of how we plea bargain them? And in Brooklyn, we take an approach that's a little bit different because we do divert some gun cases. It's an issue that myself and the police department discuss all the time, whether or not diverting some of these cases makes us safer or makes us less safe. And so we're looking at that question in Brooklyn carefully. But in terms of our judiciary, when we get a conviction at trial, they do what they're required to do. Unfortunately, and I think this is a big issue for us in the county, is that it takes us way too long to get these cases before a judge, and we have to do a much better job because we need accountability on the front end of these cases. Yes?
To follow up on Tony's question, is the issue, I guess it seems to be you're sort of walking around two issues. Is the issue the casework you're getting from the police department on these gun cases, or is the issue the time it takes once you get the casework to get someone to trial and get a conviction? And secondly, what's the acquittal rate in Brooklyn these days for a gun case?
We win about half of our gun cases that go to trial, so about 50% is the acquittal. And the work with the police department, we've gotten much better over the last year, I would say, in particular, since we started meeting with the police department. They've went really out of their way to get us some video showing the apprehensions. And they have a gun enhancement unit in Brooklyn that's doing phenomenal work. And when those officers that are part of the gun enhancement unit are involved in the case, we see much better results.
Does anyone know the acquittal rate for the other 4 boroughs?
We don't have the acquittal rate yet.
Well, we can get it for you.
We can get it for you.
Yeah, we'll get it for you. John?
Are body cameras making a difference in gun arrests now and prosecutions?
Absolutely. It's given us exactly what we're seeing. It's something, more evidence to go to the district attorney's office. So absolutely, it helps a lot.
Rocco?
The sign is different. Is that a reflection of some of the concerns you guys can raise here tonight?
What does the sign say? Yeah. I don't have a copy. We don't have a copy over here. That's our homicide plan. Yep.
Specifically, or I guess less specifically, of the Brooklyn area, to what can you attribute this rise in murders? Is there anything in particular that you're eyeing in terms of why there's an increase in homicides?
It's gun violence is really what it is. And as Chief Monahan alluded to, it gets a little tricky. We had 15 versus 5, but 5 of them are reclassifications. So, it's something that we handle year over year, so we count it. But as far as the analysis goes, it's really 10 versus 5.
Thank you. Do you know who
Makes these signs? Speaking of signs. Or who comes up with the phrases? I've always been curious. Many of us have been.
We'll let our colleagues from the world of communications let you know about the sign-making wizardry.
And hold on, Dave, just 1 second. Yeah.
Can you talk a little more about the need for the reentry stat? If there are any trends within the trend that prompted that?
Yeah, well, the police department has had much of their success because of the CompStat platform. And 3 years ago, or a little bit more than 3 years ago, a process called RxStat was created, where we joined public health with public safety, and there was a conversation there how we could help with the opioid epidemic. So through conversations with Chauncey Parker, who heads HIDA, and Manhattan DA's office, we asked if we could be part of the reentry process, because anything that's going to strengthen our communities is of an interest to us. It's not about incarceration, it's about what do people need to successfully not reoffend. So that's the genesis, the impetus of reentry stat as it stands right now.
And when we look at last year at parolees, so your parolees in non-fatal shootings, they were the perpetrator 40 times, and they were the victim 69 times. In homicides, they were the perpetrator 21 times and the victim 12. So it's a portion of what our crime stats are. So this is maybe one way that we can help get rid of those numbers or lower them.
Dave, sorry.
You certainly touched on this, but I wanted to ask you again. When you took office 5 years ago, no one thought that crime would go lower, and you've had great success in that through Commissioner Brack and also through Commissioner O'Neill. But when did you see this trend starting, at least with homicides, starting to change? And you must have been, given the history of the last 5 years,
Sure.
worried?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, I get it every day, and we talk about it every day. Literally one of the first things I see every morning is what happened the last 24 hours in terms of homicides and shootings. And so it's quite clear when you see a trend. Now, I will say, Dave, we had some other times over the last 5 years where the numbers went up for a period of time and came back down. So one of the things experience has taught me is, don't judge too soon. But no, it's obviously an area of concern. We know the specific precincts where there's an issue. And this is exactly why we have CompStat and exactly why we have precision policing, to make those adjustments and make those movements. So we take it very, very seriously. Now, overall, I would say 5 straight years of crime going down, and 2 years that we've had under 300 homicides, which hasn't happened since the 1950s, I am still confident that the NYPD will keep driving down crime, because I just see greater and greater ability. I see the NYPD doing things better and better all the time. And we're still feeling the positive benefits of neighborhood policing, of the 2,000 more officers on patrol. Like, those are still pretty new things, and the full impact is still yet to be felt. And obviously, we're going to have, I think, a real impact from greater number of gun prosecutions, et cetera. So I'm confident we can continue the progress we've made. But yeah, to your question, when I see even a little bit of change, I'm talking to the commissioner, he's talking to me.
And as the mayor said, in Brooklyn, last year was a historic low in terms of homicides, under 100 homicides, and in the last 2 years, 100 fewer shootings in Brooklyn. So we're taking this gun violence very seriously now. We're going to work with the mayor and with the commissioner to make sure that we're always paying attention to every single case. But I'm optimistic, as the chief law enforcement officer of Brooklyn, that we're going to continue to make sure Brooklyn is a safe place to raise our families and to live and work. So we're pretty confident that this is just an area of concern, but not necessarily a lasting trend.
All right, so much for crime stats. Specific crimes or other police questions? Grace.
I had a couple questions about a bike messenger who was killed in Williamsburg on Thursday night, hit and run. Any update on locating the driver or making an arrest in that case?
Chief Chan will speak about that. Thank you.
That investigation.
There you go.
Testing. That investigation on Broadway in the vicinity of Rodney Street occurred on Thursday, 2/28 at 11:35 hours in the evening in the confines of the 9-0 precinct. We have a bicyclist that was traveling on Broadway itself, and subsequently, we believe that a silver-colored tanker truck going eastbound at the direction struck the bicyclist and left the scene of that particular location. The bicyclist was pronounced DOA at the scene itself. We do have information. We have a vehicle of interest and also a driver of interest that we've been able to identify. We are in a process of, again, looking for any additional video and also witnesses. We've placed our VMS signs out there prior to the snowstorm to see if we can get additional evidence. At this process, we have scheduled an individual to come in to be interviewed by our detectives, and it is currently under investigation.
A follow-up on that same issue. My understanding is that 5 cyclists have been killed so far in the city this year, and that none of the drivers involved in any of those deaths have been arrested. I'm wondering if there's any reason for that, if it's particularly hard to make these arrests, and why. That's also just compared to last year. There were 10 cyclists during the course of fall of 2018 who were killed. So this year, we're only at the beginning of March, and it's already at 5.
Tom, you want to talk about the investigations?
Okay. Again, we have to certainly, the investigation that's conducted by our collision investigation squad is similar to a homicide investigation, which is detailed. We certainly have to ascertain the witnesses, the video, and things of that nature. This one is leaving the scene from that particular collision, and we're working on it with our detectives, working along with other local precincts and things of that nature. I believe some of them are currently still under investigation. And again, we're working with our DAs on those particular cases, and we will make the arrest when it's appropriate too.
Yeah, and Grace, just to follow up, this is a very serious issue, and unquestionably, we're going to throw everything we got at finding the perpetrators of these crimes. Overall, what we've seen in recent years, particularly because there's a lot more video available, is the NYPD does an extraordinary job of finding people. And a lot of these hit-and-run cases, we have brought the perpetrators to justice. So we're very, very focused on getting that done.
Just one other quick follow-up. Cyclists reported that NYPD officers were at that intersection in Williamsburg over the weekend and were ticketing cyclists. And they say this is part of a routine that they say occurs after the death of the cyclist. They say the police often come to the scene and crack down on cyclists rather than drivers.
Chief Chen has the numbers. Tom, you want to?
Okay. And correction on that. This is the 5 collisions involving bicyclists, as you mentioned before. We do have 1 arrest on one of the cases in reference to it. In terms of the enforcement, normally when we have a fatality at any location in the city and things of that nature involving a vehicle and things of that nature, we will conduct a 72-hour enforcement plan at that particular location. In the 72-hour plan, we issued 33 summonses. 1 summons was issued to a bicyclist. So again, we are targeting the conduct and also the violations that are occurring out there. And again, 33 summonses issued, 1 to a bicyclist.
Can I just clarify? Hold on one sec, Tom. Just clarify. How many were, just so everyone hears it loud and clear, how many were issued to vehicles?
The other 33 summonses were issued to vehicles. Only 1 was issued to a bicyclist.
There you go.
If we can, though, we do know from cyclists, we do know from local precinct commanders that they do go on these 72-hour blitzes, which do often result in a preponderance of tickets or a disproportionate number of tickets to cyclists. As you know, automobile drivers killed all of the 201 people who died on city streets last year. We've heard from the mayor on this, but from Commissioner O'Neill, I'd like to understand whether the officers or different precinct commanders know about and are taught about the disproportionate destructive power of an automobile.
Yeah, they are, as a matter of fact, because they all go to traffic stat. The XOs, sometimes the COs go to traffic stat. This is something that Tom Chan speaks about every time he holds a traffic stat meeting. So we are, we do conduct enforcement. As Tom said, out in Brooklyn, 32 were to automobiles, 1 was to a bicyclist. We do have to make sure that everybody drives safely and rides safely also. Yeah.
quickly clarify, that 72, the 33 went to cyclists and 32 to drivers, that was from this Thursday. That was the crackdown right after this Thursday's incident, correct?
Correct. Yes.
There was a fatal bus accident this morning in the confines of the 115. Any criminality there with the bus driver?
That's a matter that's currently being investigated by our collision investigation squad. At approximately 2:55 in the morning, we have a New York City MTA bus that was traveling westbound on Roosevelt Avenue. Subsequently, the driver was notified that there was a pedestrian that was possibly struck and underneath the wheel of the bus. The individual was subsequently pronounced at the hospital. He's currently unidentified at this time. The bus driver did stop at the scene, and it's a matter that's being investigated at this time.
Yep.
Fatal stabbing of Uber driver in 4-5?
Sure. Bill?
Yeah, this was an incident that happened Saturday night about a little past 9 o'clock. It's a tragedy. A 27-year-old man trying to make a living, married, 2-year-old child, and he was found after a 911 call was placed at 4160 Hutchinson River Parkway East. He was in his 2015 Toyota Camry. So we do an investigation. We track down video. We released images. We did a media release of the individual that we feel is responsible for this death. We're continuing to track down additional video. This suspect was seen wearing all black. He ran westbound on Hutchinson River Parkway East, then westbound on Bartow Avenue, then northbound on Coab City Boulevard. We looked at other robberies in the area to see if they match up, if this matches up to any other ones, and it doesn't. So we're continuing to track down video and witnesses. I would ask the public, please help us. Call Crime Stoppers, contact them if you have any information leading to this death of this 27-year-old man.
Was he in fact on duty?
Yeah, he was working. There's different ways that I know he had worked for Uber. He also picked up fares along the street. We did recover his phone and we did recover money, so it doesn't at this point appear that anything of value was taken from him. Crime scene is processing that vehicle right now, and we're hoping that we get some forensic evidence. Right now, we would classify it as an attempted robbery, then the car crashed, but that could always change.
On Detective Simonson's shooting, I know the department said last week that the ballistics evidence is inconclusive. Does the department have more clarity on kind of how this all happened, where people were standing, how this went so tragically wrong? And if the department is clear on it, is there any intention to speak about any of that?
Yeah, we did a briefing. The Force Investigation Division did a briefing for us. It's hard to watch, but I said any officer involved shooting, we're going to learn from it. And I asked Chief Shortell from the Training Bureau, with oversight by Commissioner Tucker, to conduct a comprehensive review of what happened and what we're teaching people when they respond to armed commercial robberies. I don't know, Ben, if you want to add anything to it.
Yeah, so that inquiry is begun, and in fact, we'll be getting together again this week, I think Wednesday, with Chief Shortell and this team that we put together to take a deeper dive and look into just the circumstances. It's very complicated, which is why we ended up with this tragedy. So we'll look at it very closely. We'll take it apart and try to come up with and get some sense of both in terms of how it'll inform us going forward, in terms of how we train, and reminding our officers about the need to be really focused on what they do at the scenes when they arrive, and what information they have, and let that drive and dictate what they do next. But as you all know, when you have a situation as fluid as this one was, and as quickly as it occurred, it makes it very, very challenging.
103rd Precinct on Friday, there was a man who was found dead in his backyard under sort of mysterious circumstances. Just wondering if there's any update on that.
Bill, you have anything on that?
Yeah, I'll have to look into it for you, but at this point, I think I would know about it if there was any criminality. Usually we wait for the autopsy. If something would come back from the OCME, we would get notified. So I'll get back to you on that.
Tony?
Commissioner, following up on what Commissioner Tucker just mentioned about the after-action review and the shooting Detective Simons and his death. In light of the body camera decision out of the appellate division, are you going to be in a process of releasing this long backlog of body camera requests that you've had pending under the FOIA? And have you given any consideration, or does a criminal case compromise your ability to disclose the body camera videos of the Simons case?
Each and every instance is different, and we spoke about that before the TRO went into place. We are working with local prosecutors, in this case, the Queens District Attorney's Office, and at some point, I'm sure we'll be releasing some of that body-worn camera footage. John?
This weekend, you put out a video in the 6-6 precinct of a bunch of homeless men getting beat up by a bunch of kids. Is there any developments in that case?
Bill's got that.
Yes, sir. So, yes, we actually have good news. So there were 5 individuals that punched, kicked, and threw objects at 4 individuals that were on a sidewalk on 10th Avenue between 60th and 61st Street on Saturday, and it was the 23rd, and it was about 6:45 in the morning. So one of those males, it's a 42-year-old, he's in critical condition in Lutheran Hospital, and he's on a ventilator right now. 3 other individuals, male 61, male 51, and male 41 are recovering. So in the course of our investigation, we've identified 3 individuals. 2 of them are in custody for unrelated matters, and I'll go through each one. Adolfo Romero, he's a 25-year-old. He's in custody for committing an unrelated robbery on Saturday night in transit. In addition, Jesus Guadalupe, he's a 29-year-old. He's in custody from February 28th. He had an open container and he gave a false name. And then the one individual that's still wanted is Blasio Zachariah, and we'll get you additional information. This is him. And then there's 2 more individuals that were punching and kicking them, which we have, we're close to getting their government names, and we'll release that to you once we have it.
Shall I say at this point?
No, this case is ongoing, and it's developing. Romero was just arrested on Saturday night for that unrelated transit robbery, but they will be charged for this crime here.
Is it your belief that this is just an attack and the robbery was an afterthought, or was it a robbery and they were mad about how little money they had on?
No, the individuals that approached the 4 that were sleeping, I believe it was a robbery. I believe that they were looking for money as well.
Okay. Anything else? Yep.
Back on the hate crime numbers.
Bill, can you go over the hate crime numbers, please?
Yes, sir. So the hate crimes are up 66 versus 47 this year versus last. That's an increase of 19 or 40%. In those 66 cases, there are 33 arrests, and of those 66, 51 are either aggravated harassment, criminal mischief. The difference between aggravated harassment would be where there's no damage, there's graffiti written in chalk, or shaving cream, or even snow. We had an incident, a SWAT sticker. It seems like most of the increases in anti-Semitic type crimes. And the criminal mischief where there's a damage to a piece of property. So that's what we're noticing. Again, the 33 arrests this year versus 17 arrests last year at the same period of time. So these types of crime, very difficult when you have somebody drawing an anti-Semitic symbol on a piece of property. We'd hope that there's video. In some of these instances, there is video where we could get an identification or a lead on the direction that this individual, the perps, came from or fled to. We're hoping that there's witnesses. But, you know, just looking at the 33 arrests, that's a lot of hard work done by our hate crimes unit, headed up by Inspector Mark Molinaro.
Thanks, Bill. Yep.
I have to ask the mayor this question about snow.
And we're doing police. We'll certainly come to other topics.
Yeah, one last.
For the Uber driver that was killed in the Bronx, was there any video recording from inside the car if he was using a ride-hailing app?
I'd rather not comment on that right now. That car is being processed today by our crime scene unit. So as part of that, delving into that vehicle, that's one of the things that we look at in addition to forensic evidence.
In San Francisco, it's actually required for ride-hailing app or taxis to report their passengers. Is that something that's ever been discussed in the administration? To prevent this catch the murder? This is for the mayor, sorry.
Sorry, say again, my apology.
In other cities, some other cities, it's required to film the passengers in their taxis or something like that. Is it something your administration has discussed to be able to track when something happens like this murder?
Look, our goal is to keep everyone safe, including obviously the folks who drive for-hire vehicles. And, you know, I take my lead from the NYPD on what they think will help us achieve it. So if that's something we need to look at, we will, but we'll be governed by what NYPD thinks will be effective. One more?
Clarify which arrest was made in the cyclist death so far this year?
Congressman Chan, do you have that? We're going to have to get back to you, okay? All right.
Okay.
Just last week, when there was a press conference on Friday, the 7-0 murder of the 15-year-old on Flatbush Avenue was mentioned, and Chief Shea had mentioned about we're making progress. We do have a person identified. We have probable cause on that person. This 15-year-old, it was Friday, February 22nd, about 5:44 when he was shot and killed in his torso, head, and arm. There were two individuals that we were looking for. I thank the public because you helped us, the media helped us, the public helped us identify this individual. This is his picture. It's Marshall Hamilcar. He's a 22-year-old individual, and we're going to get you information on him. So I thank you again for helping us solve this murder.
Were they in fact looking for the older brother?
He indicated that he was looking for the older brother, yes. We're still investigating. Again, we don't have him in custody yet. We're asking for your help to locate him. Our Fugitive Enforcement Division is currently looking for him, to try to locate him and try to arrest him. And then hopefully we'll have additional information after that as far as what the reason was.
Okay. Reset. All right, door is closed. All right. I'm just sorry, I don't know your name? Oh, I'm sorry, my apology.
It's 11. So just have to ask you, do you still stand by your decision to close public schools for today? And what do you say to critics who are bashing that decision?
Nicole, the decision I make with the school's chancellor is always, oops, sorry, my apology. Nicole, the decision I make with the school's chancellor is always about the safety of our kids. That's the number one consideration. And we looked at the information at the end of the afternoon yesterday. Have been very, very consistent. It indicated the kind of situation that was going to hit right as the school buses were rolling and potentially very intense accumulation around that time. And it just did not look like a safe situation for kids based on the information we had. You know, later there was an update around 10 o'clock or 10:30 that confirmed the same exact trend. So we have to make decisions based on the information we have. If we think we're seeing a clear picture, then it's important to let our parents know as quickly as possible. I was a public school parent, and I'll tell you, parents need that information, the first available option. We also consulted with a variety of experts, not just the National Weather Service, throughout the afternoon yesterday. Had we seen a variety of projections and opinions, we might have delayed the decision, but every analysis was the same. It was very consistent, and based on the information we had, we thought it was important to make a decision and get the word out to parents.
Let's put aside the weather prognostication on that one. Let's talk a little bit about cars. Obviously, teachers got 50,000 parking spaces as a result of your administration expanding use of placards. A lot of police officers, firefighters drive to work. 51% of cops live outside of the city. You've spoken a little bit about how you want to create more parking for police officers, more parking for FDNY officials. Is this cancellation of school, could it be seen within the prism of someone who views New York commuting as a car-based thing, when in fact it is mostly a transit thing?
Well, obviously, Gersh, there's a thing called school buses, and that a huge number of our kids get to school on school buses. And the report that we had made very clear that the storm could be at its worst directly at the time when school buses were starting to roll, let alone what it would mean in terms of our sanitation department's ability to clear streets if we had that much more activity on them. So we have to look at all these things in perspective. Look, like you, I would like to see more and more people use mass transit. I am someone who did not even own a car until 1999, and I do not intend to own a car going forward. But when you're thinking about a decision like on a snowstorm, you do have to take into account that a lot of people do use cars. There's a lot of trucks out there. There's a lot of school buses out there. We have to look at all that. And the number one question is, how do we keep our kids safe? Yes?
Just following up on that, to what extent are teachers who need to drive into the city taken into account in this? Anecdotally, we're just hearing that, and maybe there are numbers to back this up, that more and more teachers are who work in the public school system, don't live in the city, but commute in from elsewhere.
It's certainly a factor. The most important factor is, and everyone would agree with this, including our teachers, the most important factor is the safety of our kids. And that is where we make the decision first and foremost. We're aware of the fact that a lot of our staff are coming in from relatively far away. So that certainly informs what kind of school day we would have if we really had tough conditions. In this case, it was clear the worst snowfall would be to the north of the city, but it was also clear the storm was moving eastward, so we didn't like either of those things. We didn't like the fact that for teachers and other staff coming in from the northern suburbs, that was going to be a challenge. For staff coming in from Long Island, they were going to actually be experiencing worse weather as the hours passed leading up to school starting. A lot of pieces that did not look good here. And the other thing to remember is, and we've all been through this together, take the National Weather Service report, and then as a matter of precaution, you have to add several more inches to the report as a question of safety. You have to be conservative. We've seen those reports jump up. I remember the storm that ended up being the worst in the history of New York City, I think it was 28, 29 inches, started out early reports as 8 to 10 inches and just jumped up intensely as we went along. And so we've learned the hard way that you got to assume the worst projection and then some, and you got to assume that it will come at the worst possible time. So originally the projection was the hours right before rush hour. We had to assume that could easily drift right into the middle of rush hour. Yeah.
The city's response to the November snowstorm, which sort of escalated in strength quicker than people expected, color this response, and how much of sort of the administration's response at all? They've done the analysis showing that your administration's been more likely to declare snow days than your predecessors, is colored by some of the troubles the city's had dealing with snowstorms in the past, most infamously with Mayor Lindsay.
Yeah, the last storm was very different, obviously, and it wasn't around a time that would have affected school. So really, the decisions we make are based on our history with storms that might have affected the opening of school. And we definitely had a few situations like I just described where the numbers came in a lot higher than projected and the timing was worse than was originally projected. So that's very much in the front of our mind. Now, this is the first school day we've had, snow day we've had all year. So it's still a pretty rare occurrence. But, you know, I think the important thing is to think about, you're thinking about those school buses rolling, you're thinking about families taking their kids to school, whether they're in a vehicle, whether they're in a school bus, whether they're on foot, whether they're on subway. If it looks like everything is coming together at exactly the wrong time, you know, icy conditions, intense snowfall, that's when we get worried, and this one looked like that could exactly happen. That worst case scenario could happen. Yes, Willie?
Do you support Governor Cuomo's efforts to revive the Amazon deal, bring Amazon back? And have you or anybody in your administration or EDC reached out to Amazon as part of that?
I see no evidence that Amazon is reconsidering. My team has certainly made clear to the folks at Amazon if they want to engage in discussions, we will certainly have discussions, but there's no evidence at this point that there's any interest.
It's made clear, can you talk about that? Have they called them recently to say we're here to discuss? Please.
Yeah, they made clear last week, as you know, some more information seemed to be flowing, that we're ready to talk if they want to talk, but we've gotten no tangible evidence of that. Yes.
I had a budget question for you.
Please.
So you want your agencies to collectively cut $750 million, at least, maybe more, depending on what's needed. I'm curious, the council speaker said he would like to see 0 service reductions as part of that. And I'm curious if you think that's realistic or if you've included any sort of mandates like that in your directives that you're going to give to your agencies.
I appreciate the question. So $750 million is overall savings that have to be achieved from the time of the preliminary budget to the time of executive budget. Now, that can include the PEG program, the expansion of the partial hiring freeze, and any other form of savings. It's not that it's, you know, only one kind of savings. We're looking for any and all that will get us to $750 million by April. The goal, of course, is to avoid service cuts. And I think many agencies would, when challenged, when they handle this kind of scenario properly, find other types of savings that do not affect frontline service. But I did say at the time of the preliminary budget, if an agency is not constructive in that process, the budget director will make those decisions herself. And I also said that we're not holding programmatic activities harmless. We're not saying those are outside the conversation. There may be some programs that when we look at, we don't feel as worthwhile as other things we spend money on. But what I think will happen is a mixture of hiring-related savings, other types of savings, and then the PEG program, and generally that will be agencies finding something other than frontline service to cut from. Yeah.
Have you sent out any sort of directives to the agencies yet to say, here's how much your agency needs to cut?
That will be happening very soon. It has not been sent yet, but it will be happening very soon. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about, to sort of swing it back to Amazon, sort of what lessons you learned from Amazon and how you're going to apply those in selling congestion pricing in the deal that you struck with the governor last week?
Well, look, it's a very fair question, but I also want to note the apples and oranges dynamic here. The approach that I took, I think, was part of an outcome in which a clear majority of New Yorkers believe the Amazon deal would mean more jobs, more revenue, more opportunity for people who lived in public housing or kids coming out of CUNY. There was clear majority support. So all of the information that was put out, all of the making the argument, clearly worked if we're talking about majority rule. If we're talking about how one company makes its own decision, that's an entirely different matter. So I think there was always going to be some dissent. That's normal in New York City. I'm certain there's some things we could have explained better, but when you already have majority support, including a lot of elected officials, a lot of small business owners and leaders, a lot of public housing leaders, I mean, we had the support. it really came down to Amazon's decision. None of us saw that coming. If they had simply stayed the course, we would be in the middle of implementing right now.
Congestion pricing pulls pretty well, not unlike the Amazon deal, but it's opposed by sort of vocal minorities, people who drive a lot, commuters into the city, who do have a lot of sway in Albany. Are you worried that this is another situation where sort of, a tightly knit together opposition can defeat sort of in your mind sort of the will of the majority?
It's fair to say it's a major decision, and there's going to be strong views on both sides. But again, to your first question, I think is a very fair one, but I think actually looking at the difference between the two is important. There was a lot of support for the jobs and the revenue that the Amazon deal would bring. And there was not a particular reason it had to stop. The difference here is the congestion pricing plan has to go to a full vote of the legislature, so it's an entirely different process. Now, there's clearly openness both in the Assembly and the Senate. You look at everything that we've heard from the legislative leaders, they've maintained an open view. I think there's been clear understanding that something has to give. There has to be a decision as part of the budget that will allow us to finally fix the MTA once and for all. I will tell you that unlike something like the Amazon deal, which was a new thing, the subways are not a new thing. And elected officials have been hearing from their constituents for years and years with great intensity, especially the last few years. So I think if you're a senator or an assembly member, you're thinking about your constituents who are demanding a solution. And something has to happen. There's not an option for the legislature not to act. Also, with the governor and I finally having come to a shared vision, that's a powerful statement. And that vision talks about multiple types of revenue. And it talks about a lockbox, which is something I think a lot of New Yorkers wanted to know, that there would be a guarantee the money would actually go to the subways and buses. And really addresses some of the fairness issues, too, that have been associated with the issue. So I think there's momentum. I'm going to talk to a lot of people in Albany, and I'm going to go around the city talking about this, and I'm going to talk about it as someone whose views evolved because the crisis got worse and worse, and we had to do something.
Previously, do you think that work rule concessions from the building trades and from the TWU should be part of any congestion pricing package? Because so much of the MTA's problem is cost overruns and an inability to operate efficiently, maybe not so much an actual funding shortfall, at least on the operating side.
Well, I think it's more than that. I appreciate the question. I mean, look, I think right now to get a congestion pricing and overall funding plan done, we got to focus on the plan in front of us. I think there's always issues to be worked through with labor about how to make sure any organization works effectively. And look at the example with municipal labor. We've gotten a lot of very constructive work done. Obviously, a great example, the recent teachers contract, where we came to an agreement on how to staff schools that were really having challenges getting to full staffing. What we've done with the Municipal Labor Council in terms of healthcare savings. There's lots of good examples of people recognizing there's a shared interest. So obviously we have to do that with the MTA as well. But I don't think that's part of the decision over the next 4 weeks. I also think, to your point, the problems of the MTA management go far beyond anything in labor deals. And I agree with the governor that that structure needs to be revamped. And as you know, I agree with the notion of one person being held responsible, in this case, the governor.
Event after you announced the deal with the governor, the day after you're getting on the subway. Gersh asked you a question: what did you glean from the trip? And your response was, "What I gleaned is that people really depend on their subways. They need their subways to get to work, and they're frustrated because a lot of people I've talked to, and I don't know when I've ever, say that they don't know whenever they're going to get to work." To sort of paraphrase your quote. Do you worry that you sort of become disconnected from the pain that New Yorkers feel every day when it comes to riding the subways?
No, look, guys, I hope you understand, as someone who rode the subways for decades and decades, that was not a revelation to me. I was only telling you what I heard from people. Gleaned is eye of the beholder. I'm going to hold Gersh personally responsible. Glean. It was a softball question. Thank you. Glean does not mean heard it for the first time. Amazing, stunning revelation. Obviously, I know what people have been going through, and I've experienced it myself plenty of times. My point only was to say the frustration levels are intense, the fact that people are demanding a solution, and they know the time is now, that we can't wait any longer. Last call, if there's anything else? Yes?
Just to touch one more thing on congestion pricing. There are some folks from Long Island in the state legislature, Democratic state senators from out there, who are arguing that in order for them to support it, they want to see a portion of the revenue or a fair share, however they put it, of the revenue go toward Long Island Railroad improvements. You have made a big deal about the lockbox and the revenue being dedicated to the subway's needs in particular. I'm wondering how you respond to that and to what extent you'd be open to seeing a portion or however large a portion of the revenue go to the railroad or to the commuter rails.
So, one, I respect their concerns because they're talking about mass transit for their communities. Two, we need to come to an agreement that those senators can live with. The lockbox idea is that whatever the dollar figure that's going to be committed to our subways and buses cannot be moved. It can't be supplanted. It can't be transferred. And bluntly, unfortunately, I'm speaking from painful experience that almost $500 million in the last 7-8 years was moved out of the MTA budget into the state overall budget, even though it was dedicated MTA revenue. So we have to make sure that never happens again. There has to be a legally binding agreement to stop that. But I'm open to whatever gets us to a solution by April 1st. That's the bottom line. Yes?
Mayor, I know you've sort of toyed with the idea of running for president, and last week the First Lady said in an interview on a podcast that she didn't think it was the right time for you to run. Do you guys have different personal realities on that? Or are you
No, again, I haven't ruled anything out, and she and I are constantly thinking about what we think is the right thing to do, and there's nothing new to say. She was only saying, making a very broad comment. Yes?
Kind of going off of that and to your earlier comments about the governor, there was an article in The Atlantic about the governor today in which he said, not today, sorry, but in which he said he didn't feel he had been petty, sort of suggesting that maybe you had been petty in the relationship before. And also, what do you think of his potential aspirations to run for president?
Yeah, I don't want to relitigate anything from the past. The governor and I obviously have had some real differences, and they've been very substantive and philosophical differences. And we've also found some areas that we agreed upon and we could work together on. Mayoral control education, Amazon, and now, of course, the plan to fix the subways. So, I think the important thing is to keep trying to work together on all the areas we agree. And if I think he's doing something that's not good for New York City, I'll stand up for New York City. I'm not going to comment on anybody's political aspirations or decisions. That's for each person to make for themselves. Okay, thanks, everyone.